Alright guys, today we are talking about parallelograms. We are on page 6 of your chapter 6 note packet. I've already written down the 5 characteristics of parallelograms, so if you could go ahead and pause the video and write these all down in those spots. Alright, the first characteristic says your opposite sides are congruent. So what that means is that sides across from each other are going to be the same length. So AD and BC are across from each other. AB and DC are across from each other. So AD has to equal 8 and DC has to equal 15. It also says that they're parallel. So anytime I hear parallel, I'm thinking I'm going to have to use an angle relationship eventually. It says my opposite angles are congruent. So again, those are angles that are sitting across from each other. So D and B are across from each other, making them the same. And I don't have A and I don't have C, but another property says that consecutive interior angles are supplementary. That means they add to 180. So what that means is on the same side of a parallelogram. So A and D make up a side of the parallelogram. Those two angles are going to add to 180. So I can subtract away 180 minus 68, and that will get me 112 for A. And since it's opposite of C, 112 for C. Go ahead and pause this video and try number 2 on your own. All right, you should have paused the video and knocked out number 2. So let's look at number 3. On number 3, I know that my opposite sides are congruent, so I can mark those. So if RU is 18, that means ST is 18. And if RS is 27, that means RS is 27. And then we see some diagonals. Those are running from corner to corner. And I am told in property 5 that diagonals bisect each other, which means they cut them in half. So if I'm looking here, that means V is acting as a midpoint of both segments. So if UV is 7, VS has to be 7. Well, if UV is 7 and VS is 7, that whole thing is 14. They don't ask for it, but again, this is the midpoint. They do ask for VS. And then they ask for VT. Well, they tell me right down here that RT, the whole thing is 30. Well, if the whole thing is 30, that means if I'm bisecting it, part of it is 15, and the other part has to be 15. So VT should equal 15. All right, let's look at number 4. They tell me that angle FED, F to E to D, so that whole thing is 134 degrees. I can find my other missing part by doing 134 minus 71, and that gets me 63 sitting right here. One of my properties, we've already said, is that opposite angles are congruent. So I can float 134 up here to angle C, so all of angle C is 134. And I can find angle D. We've talked about how angles that are consecutive interior or angles that make up the same side of the parallelogram are also going to be congruent. So I could do 180 minus 134, and that will get me 46 for D, which means all of F is 46 as well, because those are across from each other. I can find the other part of F by doing 46 minus 21, which is 25. All right, so let's see if I have any of my angles. D to E to C. I do have that. D to E to C is 63 degrees. I have C to D to E. C to D to E is all of that, so 46 degrees. And I have D to F to E. D to F to E, that is 25 degrees. So there's only one that I'm missing. And what I need to look at is I need to look at the fact that these lines are parallel. And if I hop on a transversal, what type of angle pair is 71 and this side of C? Well, that angle pair are going to be alternate interior, so those are going to be congruent. So I can float my 71 up the transversal and jump over, which means I can also float my 63 up the transversal and float over. And so my angle of E to C to D is going to be 71 degrees. I can do this same alternate interior property with the other transversal. If I'd hopped on this guy, I can float my angles up the transversal and jump over it for that alternate interior effect. Float up the transversal and jump over it again for the alternate interior angle effect. Go ahead and pause this video and do number 5 on your own. All right, guys, let's turn the page to page 7 and look at number 9. So they tell me that TV is the whole segment, is 74, and they tell me that just WV is 4x plus 1. But we talked about that W is going to act as a midpoint, so it's bisecting that. So how many WVs is it going to take to make a whole TV? Well, it's going to take 2 of them. So I need to take either multiply by 2 or add it together twice, but I need 2 of them in order to set those equal. The blue and the green are not equal so far. I would have to distribute and then solve that guy for x, and I would get 9. The most important thing is that you cannot directly set those equal because they are not the same length so far. It's being bisected, so I need to double it or cut the other one in half if I need. Go ahead and try number 10 on your own and pause this video and type the answer in when the video asks you to. All right, guys, let's jump down to number 13 and work with some angles. I've labeled the whole angle they gave me. It's 134 degrees. That's all of angle L. And I noticed that my other 2 angles they gave me aren't at the same angle. But we've talked about this. We have our parallel lines and we have our transversal. So parallel lines, jump on our transversal. I can float these angles up the transversal and jump over. So if I float 25 up the transversal and jump over it for that alternate interior angle effect, I now have all of angle K and all of angle L. Those make up one side of the parallelogram, which means they're going to be supplementary. So I could add those 2 angles together to equal 180 because they make up one side of that parallelogram. That will end up getting me 4x plus 168 will get me 4x equals 12, which will get me x equals 3 when I solve for that. So again, the most important part here is that you know that you can float your angles up the transversal and jump over for your alternate interior, and that angles that make up the same side of your parallelogram are always adding up to 180 degrees. If we look at number 14, I get all of angle B is 115 degrees, and I'm asked to find ADB, which is sitting right here, A to D to B. Well, I don't really have anything I can do so far. What I know, though, is I know that I have parallel lines, and I have a transversal, and that I can always float my angles up that transversal and jump over. So my 6x minus 11 is also sitting there. So I now have both parts of BD, and I know what the whole thing equals. So I can set up an equation where I do both parts, part plus part, equals that whole angle. That gets me 10x minus 5 equals 115. Gets me 10x equals 120, which gets me x equals 12. They wanted ADB. I showed you what that was at the beginning, but it's right here. So I'm plugging that in. For a total of 61 degrees. All right, guys, go ahead and pause this video and try 11 and 12 on your own. Make sure you're typing your answers in when the video prompts you to. And bring any questions you may have over parallelograms to our class meeting tomorrow.